Hello, action RPG enjoyers. I wanted to make a quick video to discuss a certain aspect of Season 3 that I don't think is really talked about a lot. Technically, the mechanic is spoken of a lot, and not in a great light, might I add. But there's a very, very specific part of said mechanic that I think, and it might be slightly opium or copium that I'm taking in, but I think it's either, at the very least, a test or a possible sign of things to expect in the future of Diablo 4. And if I'm right, I think it is going to be a good thing. Now, before I actually talk about the mechanic or the aspect of the mechanic in question, I want to explain the angle that I'm coming from in the first place. So for myself, one of my biggest qualms with Diablo 4 is that it is so remarkably shallow. It is incredibly simple. It is aimed at a casual audience, but in my opinion, I think they've gone a little too far in that one direction and made it too casual. And what I mean by that is, I think it's fair to say that for most players, when they first started playing either in the beta or even in that like first month after release, I think it's reasonable to say that most players had a good time. If you bought Diablo 4 with the expectation of you buy the game, you play the game, you finish the game, and then you probably move on to another game, you're going to walk away feeling quite positive about that experience. And I think that's indicative through the review scores, because that's how a lot of people actually ended up playing it. Because not a lot of people realized that it's actually a live service game, which creates entirely new expectations. And I think the Diablo 4 devs have also looked at Diablo 3 and then gone, okay, Diablo 3 was one of the best-selling games of its time, which it was. It was literally in the top 10 best-selling games globally. And the reasons for that was because it was very simple, it was quite shallow, it was very accessible. People played couch co-op together. They'll blast through a couple of runs or a couple of rifts, whatever, and then they moved on. And again, there was this expectation of you buy the game, you play the game, maybe make a couple of characters, but then you could move on. Then with the seasons, there was no expectation for loads of new content or new DLCs. We got the one expansion, the other expansion got cancelled. You know, there wasn't this outcry when something wasn't added with each season. It was just, yeah, a ladder reset, basically. That's what people expected. But with Diablo 4, the expectation has been set in almost by two different parties. You've got Diablo 4 developers who have said, yes, we're making a live service game. It's a games as a service. You're going to get content every 3 months. It's going to improve mechanics. You're going to get additional mechanics. It's going to go core. You get new fair weather mechanics that come and go with each season. You're going to get new items. You're going to get this. You're going to get that. People are expecting content. Then you've got the fact that Path of Exile exists, another live service action RPG game that's been doing this for like 12 years now. And they've, in my opinion, and there's going to be people with different opinions about it, but overall, they've solved the live service model for action RPG games, as it were. They've made mistakes. Diablo 4 devs are seemingly making those mistakes that were made by GGG several years ago again, but that's a different topic. But they know what players want, and albeit a game aimed at a more hardcore audience, the audience that wants lots of complexity, they realize that giving players agency over their characters means that they can come back for more reasons than one. It's not just new content, it's the fact that they can make so many builds in so many different ways. Whereas in Diablo 4, you don't have that, frankly. You don't. The illusion of choice is there, but your choices are actually remarkably obvious, and every build you play is a build that was already thought up by the dev team, because it's so obvious on what gear you need to make that build work, because it was planned, it was predetermined. You don't really get any builds where people have come into the game and gone, what if I take this skill, this skill, this skill, this item, this item, this item, put them all together, and holy shit, I've just made a new build. That very, very rarely happens in Diablo 4. And the reason for this is quite simple. In Diablo 4, a lot of items, for example, do very little in terms of impact to the build. You either get an affix that increases the damage by a percentage, an affix that multiplies the damage by a percentage, or you have different versions of that same thing. Like sometimes it's with elemental damage, sometimes it's with vulnerability, sometimes it's crit. It's all just, let's add a percentage onto the end of the sum, you know? Whereas in both Last Epoch and in Path of Exile, there are different ways to change how the skill literally functions. If you were to take 10 players in Path of Exile and say, you are all to make a build where leap is your main attack. We'll give you a week. Let's see what you come up with. At the end of that week, you're going to have 10 distinctly different leap builds. Distinctly different. Some people have converted the damage. Others would have had cast on crit involved. There's 81 ways you can change how leap works in Path of Exile, which of course is a phenomenal number, and to new or more casual players would be potentially an overwhelming number. You're given the tools to create the build you want with that one skill. Likewise, in Last Epoch, it's a far more concise game. It's not as broad and as open as Path of Exile, but each skill still has like 15 to 30 different passives. Each skill. So if we take, I suppose lunge is the closest to leap, you can say to 10 Last Epoch players, make a build that uses lunge as one of your main attacks. And you will again have maybe not 10 distinctly different builds, but like a good like 6 or 7 or 8 with maybe a couple that are very, very similar, because you'll have some folks that have gone, no, I want to make it a mobility skill, like focus on the mobility. I want to make it so it debuffs enemies. I want to make it so it buffs myself. I want to make it so it focuses on damage. I want it to provide some form of utility. Like, you've got many options. In Diablo 4, you've got two options. You can either give it slow, leap slow, or you can have it so it gives you more fury. If you were to take those 10 players and say, you must all use leap as your main attack, and you give them a week, you will then have 10 leap quake players. They will all be the same build with maybe a couple of incremental differences, like, oh, I put a passive here. Oh, well, I use walking arsenal. I use the other not walking arsenal like passive and things like that. There's very, very little difference, which doesn't just have an impact on how it feels to make your own build, because when you come up with something that at least feels unique to you, it makes you feel good. It makes you want to explore and create more builds of your own design, as it were. But also when you're playing in the world and you're seeing every single barbarian play charge because it's the flavor of the month, and you're playing charge because it was the most obvious thing to pick with what's presented in front of you, it just makes the game feel a little bit less, it's lackluster. So this is where I want to talk about the Seneschal Construct. The Seneschal Construct is the first time in Diablo 4 we have seen anything that changes how a skill works that isn't just make the number bigger. Like, we've got a couple of those for sure, but then we have things like damage conversion. You can convert the type of damage to an entirely different element. Imagine if you could do that with like Fireball, which applies a dot. So now instead of it being a burning fire dot, it's a cold dot. That opens up immediately different types of builds that you can make. You've got, obviously you can change it to bleeding. I think there's an area of effect skill as well. I know there's one that adds projectiles, which again is huge. Adds area of effect, adds duration. Things that don't necessarily make the damage of the build better in isolation. But when, for example, with area of effect, obviously, one, if you increase the area of effect, you're hitting more targets. But you've also then got rooms for overlap abilities. Like, I'm actually making a teleport build. It's what we're on at the moment. And if I had the means to make the teleport area effect bigger, it means that the damage would overlap, and that would make the build so much more powerful. It's things like that, being able to add different interactions with the game that enable you to change how the build physically looks, how it actually interacts with the mobs that you're trying to kill. And also you can just make builds that someone else hasn't already thought of and is being played by every other person you're seeing on screen at the same time. And that's what I think is happening here. I hope that Blizzard are testing this system and they're going, okay, maybe our players aren't as stupid as we think they are and can handle a little teeny bit of depth. Maybe we should give them some more tools to be creative and actually make unique and distinct builds. And I think the Seneschal Construct is the test to find out if we can handle it. It could be that it's just one team versus another team because the seasons are done by two different teams at the same time. And one team's gone, wouldn't this be nice? And then the other team's like, huh? Yeah, sure, whatever. And they go on about their day. But I'm hoping that this is at least a test. Because imagine, folks, if we could have this on skills. If we had, not at the end of these, but you had an ability that had 2 tuning stones. Like if you did have to pick one specific path, the fact that you can't pick both is kind of poo. But imagine if there was 2 tuning stone slots and you can add tuning stones to your skills. So you could add more projectiles to it. So you could make it change. So you could change the damage type to cold when it's a fire skill and vice versa. So you can have it so it, I don't know, applies a dot when ordinarily it wouldn't, you know, things like that. Like these are build defining changes. And when you stack them up, it can lead to some insane interactions, some of the crazy fun builds that you see in these other games. And you're not just sat there watching everyone play Lightning Ball Sorceress or Charge Barbarian or Infinimus Necromancer. You know, there's still going to be metas, of course. That's always going to be a thing. But when everyone is playing the exact same build, it's a lot more noticeable than there is a 20% of the population playing the meta build and then everyone else is just playing for fun. You know what I mean? So that's all I want to talk about. I want this to be a test, and I suppose I'm asking you, the viewer, to perhaps engage, if you are still playing Diablo 4 Season 3, to engage with the mechanic, play around with it, see how you feel about it. And if you like it, and if you like the idea of adding tuning stones to skills, adding interactions to skills, or to items that can enable it on skills, and make them generic as well. None of this, oh, add additional projectiles to one specific skill. No, that's not what we want. Let us add projectiles to any projectile ability, because then that one thing can apply to so many builds in so many different ways that, again, you're given tools, actual choices, not the illusion of choice. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to end up waffling otherwise, but maybe tweet at Blizzard saying, yo, you know that thing you did with the Seneschal Construct? Not the construct itself, but the tuning stones. Do that to skills, please. That would be lovely. Thanks, Blizzard. Have fun. That's it from me. If you like the video, give it a like. I'm going to be putting out some more Last Epoch builds as the release rolls up. Subscribe because you want to see more of my face, right? Don't you? I hope. I don't know. Farewell. I'll remember you.